I'm going to show you the game between Fabiano Caruana and Jan Nepomniachtchi from round 2 of the Sinquefield Cup 2019. This game really caught my eye because it was a Najdorf. I've spent, well, a lot of my chess career playing and analysing the Najdorf, so this was the one that really caught my eye. Remember, if you want to subscribe to the channel, then do click on that button below. So here's the starting point of the Najdorf variation. Now, in the past, we've seen Fabiano specialise with this move, bishop e3. And you often get these tense situations where there's castling on both sides of the board with, here, for example. But in this game, Caruana plays h3, which is quite a trendy continuation, obviously looking to play g4 in some situations, and bishop e3 and knight g4 has been prevented. So e5, lots of moves there, but e5 is the principled Najdorf move, staking a claim in the middle of the board. And the most common continuation here is knight e2, with the idea g4 and knight g3, but h5 stops g4 expansion. Knight b3 played by Fabiano, less common, but there are distinct similarities with the bishop e3 variation. g4 is still the idea. So bishop e7 and g4. And b5 played by Nepo in this position, which looks very logical to begin the queenside counterplay. I just saw a recent game by Shirov. Shirov specialises with this knight b3 move, and his opponent played h6, and Shirov blew the guy away. I'm going to have to look at that game maybe in the next Hangouts. It's a fantastic game. Anyway, b5 played, looks very logical to get counterplay quickly. Pawn pushes with g5 and h4. So these pawns have been set in motion on the king side. But here, black has pretty good counterplay on the queen side already. Reminds me another variation Najdorf. Let me do a quick compare and contrast. So remember this one. We'll come back to this position. But a variation in the bishop e2 line where white goes for an early g4. Now here bishop e6 is the most accurate move in order to threaten potentially d5. But castles is inaccurate here because of g4, and white gets this pawn storm in pretty quickly. For example, as in the game between Carlsen and Nakamura, Viscount's A 2011. And white is known to have a pretty good attack in this position. And you can see that black's queenside counterplay isn't very well developed, that pawn on b7 rather than b5. Now, if I come back to our game here, you can see that Nepo's queenside counterplay is much better developed with the pawn in front of the knight, and white's development not as good. So in principle, I feel that black should be okay in this position. And I think we can see that here if white plays a standard move, queen d2. In fact, black can leap in with knight c4 straight away, forcing an exchange. And after pawn takes, the knight has to go back to c1. There's going to be counterplay on the b file. Must be fine for black. So in this position, Caruana thought for 17 minutes and compromised. He exchanged off his dark square bishop, and in principle after that, black has to be fine. But now we see one of the advantages of playing h3 and g4 and not advancing the pawn to f3. The queen comes to a more active square than usual on f3, and white is playing on the light squares here. And as we'll see later on, this diagonal can be very important, and the queen can somehow get to the king, side, maybe to the h file, much quicker than in other variations. So that's the plus side of white's position, but I feel that black should be fine here. And Nepo playing very principally, getting on with his queenside counterplay as quickly as possible. And already we have a very tense situation. And here, again, Caruana had a bit of a think. He plays, well, you could say a normal, traditional move, bishop d3. Could have played knight c4 and started complications with this move. And playing d6, and black has to return the piece here. You can see this opens up this line here, and looking at the rook as well. And after this, so queen takes rook, check. But black can castle here. Very double-edged position, rook d5. Obviously white's development could be better here, and Caruana must have rejected it because of that. But if that bishop can get into the game, you know, on c4, could be pressure here. Very interesting continuation. Anyway, he went for bishop d3 and b3. So Nepo just continuing straight on. And this is very interesting because this is not only an attacking move, but actually contributes to defense as well. Let me explain. So basically white has to keep the files closed on the queen side, so has to do this and a3. So that locks the position down. Of course, it leaves the pawn on b3, which cramps white's king. So although the position is somewhat closed, this can be very useful for black. But now here's the point. Rook a4. Now that's what I mean by combining defense and attack, because this rook sweeps across the fourth rank, and that can be very handy when it comes to defense. On the king side, knight e4 played. An important move, a good move, and that starts to, white's initiative basically on the king side. Now here, very understandably, Nepo exchanged off that dangerous knight on e4. Incredibly, black can actually get away with castling here, and that is probably the most accurate move because it prevents a maneuver. We'll see in a second the maneuver it prevents. Of course, this is very risky. You have to look at moves like knight f6 and convince yourself that nothing terrible is happening. In fact, black is still okay here after this. Bishop h7 check only leads to a draw, and here's the point. All this looks really scary. In fact, black is fine because of this important defensive move, and this pawn will drop, and well, perhaps with like this actually, and the queen defends the king as well. Castles is the most accurate move there for black. Okay, let's compare this with the game. Nepo understandably exchanged off that dangerous knight and only then castled. But here Fabiano has a very interesting possibility, and that's to play rook d3. Obviously this is only possible because the knights were exchanged, making room for that rook. And this is very annoying for black. When that pawn is defended by the queen and rook, then g6 and white's attack starts to roll forward. This is extremely dangerous. After pawn takes h5. Now black can defend here, but it's really tricky. And I think that would have put more pressure on Nepo. Instead, Caruana played rook g1, which I think is a bit tame. So he wants to advance the h-pawn. Obviously the rook defends the pawn, but taking the rook away from the h-file obviously slows things down a bit. And now Nepo takes the initiative. Queen a7, you can see he's teeing up for this sacrifice. h5 played. Now here it's not possible to take on a3. Let's look at this. This is actually very important. So pawn takes rook, queen takes, threatening devastation with queen a2 check and so on. So queen a2, queen e2, preventing queen a2 check. And if rook a8, then that queen solidly plays to b2 and white wins with an extra rook. Now bear that in mind. So Nepo now played an excellent move. Obviously things are starting to happen on the king side. g6, very strong defensive move. Takes guts to play a move like this, which obviously means that white can open up the h-file. But the point is this. It fixes that pawn on g5. So white has to defend that, in this case with the rook at the moment. And actually black's king is kind of okay here, because often that bishop will come around to g7, and that's a strong defensive formation. Okay, let's see how things pan out. So rook d3, attacking the pawn, defended by the rook. So if rook takes, if the queen recaptures, then the bishop is en prise. Very important piece, that rook on a4, just tying white down. Fabiano exchanged on g6. And now here the best move is to play rook h1. Let me just show that very quickly. Giving up the pawn on g5, but then queen g2. Now if that bishop moves, then I think something devastating is going to happen. So we give an exchange, and queen f2. Still a very double-edged position, but well, both sides should be all right there. It's a dynamic balance. Okay, let's come back to the game. Now here, rook h1 was not played. Instead, Fabiano played queen g2, which looks very natural. Keeps hold of the pawn. And the idea is to play f3 to cement the bishop on e4, and that'll also open up the second rank, allowing white to defend on the queen side. So this looks very logical, actually. And here, well, Nepo played the bishop back to f8 in order to defend the king. But he missed a fantastic opportunity here. A beautiful idea, a really beautiful idea. Let's take a look at rook takes a3. Now I repeat, this did not happen. Now why not? Let's have a look. Pawn takes, queen takes. So the threat, as before, is queen a2 followed by, well, queen c2 mate. So therefore f3 to defend along the second rank. Now that means if, let's say, rook a8, then the queen comes across to b2 and defends as before. And here it's simply not possible to play b2 because of rook takes queen. So both players assumed that white was fine here. Well, in fact, Fabiano saw, after he'd played this, that black has a winning move in this position. This is brilliant. Queen a7. Now, it looks completely counterintuitive to sack a rook, break through, and then retreat your queen. So what's the point of this move? Well, it's looking down at the rook here. So that means that the queen, white's queen, can't come across to b2 to block the b pawn because of queen takes rook check. So first of all, rook d1. And now black has enough time to play b2, threatening queen a1 check. And there's no defense. Well, the best defense is to simply give up the queen. Whoops, that's a mouse slip. Queen takes pawn. Rook takes. But in this situation, with queen and opposite colour bishop, then black's attack continues. And in this case, the queen is stronger than the two rooks. Another problem is that that bishop actually isn't very secure, because at some crucial moment f5 will come to drive the bishop away. Of course, you have to make sure your king is secure first, but basically you attack with queen and bishop first. And that must be winning for white. You can see that bishop can crawl in very easily on the dark squares. So a glorious opportunity for Nepo in that position. Rook takes pawn, should be winning. Instead, he thought first about defense. I think queen a7 is a very difficult move to spot. And now Caruana is secure. The bishop is secure on e4. Oops. Defended by the pawn. The queen defends along the second rank. So obviously this idea fails because queen b2 just shuts everything out, blocks the b pawn, covers the a file. So Nepo turns to the c file, but actually Fabiano can defend there. Threatening a mate. Black's defensive formation is absolutely secure. The king just hides on f8. The bishop covers crucial dark squares. So the queen comes back. Now, if the rook comes down to c2, in fact, white is fine in this position. White covers. Or if rook c8, threatening a mate, well, this pawn can be taken. In fact, an even better move is to play queen e3, controlling c1, defending that pawn, and then rook takes pawn. And in fact, white would be better in that position. So let's come back here. Nepo played bishop f8, and then queen h2, threatening the mate on the h file, and now they repeated moves. Neither side could see how to actually improve their position, and so a move repetition occurred, and that means a draw by threefold repetition. Very tense game indeed, and what a chance Nepo missed. He'll be kicking himself. So there we go. After 2 rounds in the Sinquefield Cup, there's only been one decisive game. All the games were drawn in round 2, although I have to say they were very, very tense. Some really interesting games. But after 2 rounds, the leader is still Vishwanathan Anand with 1.5 points. Remember, if you're not a subscriber, then do click that subscribe button. And if you want to support us, do check out the links to PayPal or patreon.com. You'll find those in the video description. Thanks for watching.